Hey mama, so I'm 31 weeks pregnant and I'm starting to get into that headspace for preparing for birth. And one of the big questions that I know first-time moms are asking is, how will I know when I'm in labor? So in this video, that's the question that I'm going to be answering as your childbirth educator, birth doula, and mama to almost 3 kiddos. And if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe and then hit the bell so you don't miss out on any empowering educational videos that come your way on this channel. So let's talk about those labor signs, and make sure you stick around till the end to hear my number 1 tip to do and number 1 thing not to do when you know that labor has started. Now, there are a few things that can happen that might indicate that labor is starting soon, but does not mean that it's begun. So let's quickly cover those. Number 1, losing your mucus plug. So the mucus plug is a gooey, thick, protective mucus that forms inside the cervix during pregnancy to protect the womb and baby from bacteria and infection. Honestly, all throughout pregnancy, but especially in the final weeks of pregnancy, you can lose bits of your mucus plug or gobs of it without it meaning that labor is starting soon after. The mucus plug actually is always regenerating, so just because you lose it or some of it doesn't mean labor is going to begin ASAP. As the cervix keeps opening or dilating, it will eventually fall out though. The second thing that you might notice at the end of pregnancy is some bloody show, and this happens as the cervix dilates or opens and the blood vessels in the cervix burst and cause a little bit of blood-tinged discharge. Now, if you are bleeding substantially, this is a sign that something could potentially be wrong, and so you should definitely notify labor and delivery or your care provider right away about it. Number 3, dilation or effacement. Dilation happens as the cervix opens, and effacement is when the cervix shortens. Both are necessary in order for baby to be born vaginally. And the way to know if you are dilating and effacing is by getting a cervical exam where a care provider will insert their fingers into the vagina and feel the cervix and measure and gauge how open, soft, and thin it is. However, before labor begins, neither dilation or effacement tells you anything about when labor will begin. You are no closer or further from labor if you are 0 centimeters dilated or 3 centimeters dilated. Often, if you've given birth before, your cervix will be slightly dilated before labor starts, but if you aren't, it really doesn't matter. Cervical change doesn't need to happen until you're in labor. Number 4, baby dropping. Now, again, this can happen to you or not, and whether your baby noticeably drops is not a sure sign that labor is starting soon or it's a long way off. When baby drops, it means they settle deeper into your pelvis. Usually, this will help you feel more space in your rib area and make breathing a little bit easier for you toward the end of pregnancy. If you want to know how to open the top of your pelvis to create more space in the inlet for your baby to move down and through it, the Built to Birth course has so many positions to get in to open that top space of the pelvis. Also, the prenatal fitness program is designed to prepare your body for birth so that it's ready for baby to navigate that space that they're inside with more space and more balance so labor is more efficient. And then number 5, you just feel achy, period-like cramps in your belly and your low back. And these can definitely be an immediate precursor to labor, but also can just be a soft sign that labor might start soon. So all of these things are some hints that labor might be starting soon, but are not definite surefire signs. So let's talk about what signs you will get that labor has started or will start very soon. Number 1, your water breaks. Now, this doesn't happen as often as the movies would have you believe, but it could happen to you. It occurs in about 10% of pregnancies. If your water releases before contractions have begun, typically contractions will start within 24 to 30 hours. This is true 95% of the time. Sometimes your water will release in a big gush, or often it's just a slow trickle. This does not mean your baby has run out of fluid. They continually make it as they pee, which is why you want to stay well hydrated so that you're passing that hydration to your baby. Now, some providers will say you must come in right away to start the induction process. Be aware that this is not informed consent. Instead, they should be talking to you about chances of infection as well as monitoring yourself and your fluid. I already have a video about what to do with your water breaking before contractions beginning and what you should know. And so that is linked right up here. One thing I will say about that video that I didn't mention in it is that infection does increase with the length of time the water bag is open, but it also correlates with increased number of cervical exams. The more exams that you get where a provider is putting their finger up into your vagina to feel the cervix is going to increase your chance of infection exponentially. Ideally, if your water does break, you do not want any cervical exams unless absolutely necessary, and most of the time they are totally unnecessary. But that's something that you have to learn a little bit more about yourself and then advocate for when the time comes. But if your water breaks, it's a pretty good indication that labor is right around the corner. The second way to know is based on your surges. Now, moms commonly experience braxton hicks at the end of their pregnancy. I know that I'm experiencing them now myself, and these are like practice surges that can be really mild or can be a bit more intense. The difference between braxton hicks and contractions are braxton hicks will go away if you pee, drink some water, and or sit and rest for a little while. If they are true labor surges, they will intensify, they're going to get closer together, and then fall into more of a rhythmic pattern over time. And this can take hours for you to recognize, so you'll have plenty of time unless you have a history of precipitous births, which is when labor happens really, really quickly, but that's not the norm for most first-time mamas. Now, sometimes contractions will do all those things. They build in intensity, they get closer together, and they fall into more of a rhythmic pattern that you can track. And then after a couple hours, they just stop altogether. And sometimes mom will go into the hospital thinking that they're in labor just to find out that their cervix is hardly open at all and that they've really had no change despite having all of these progressing labor symptoms. Some providers call this false labor, and in my experience, there is really nothing false about it. This is true labor, but it's often due to baby's position in the womb and pelvis that is keeping them from being able to put adequate pressure on the cervix to make it change. So the contractions that you experience are really working hard trying to help get baby into a different position, but because there's little to no biofeedback from baby's head against the cervix, labor might slow or stop altogether. And I talk all about this in my Built to Birth course, and I give you the positions that you need to give baby more space to navigate the inside of your body to be born. And you can get access to that birth course down in the description below. So if your surges are meeting those qualifications of growing in intensity, getting closer together, and falling more into that rhythmic pattern over several hours, that's how you know you're in labor. As this happens, you might have some backache sensations, you might feel nauseous, you'll likely have increased bloody show, more mucus plug coming out, and eventually your water breaking if it hasn't already. But even with all of these things, it doesn't mean you need to rush to the hospital. And so this brings us to my number one tip to do when you're confident labor has begun, and it's rest and stay home. Labor can be long, so the more you can sleep or at the very least rest at the beginning of labor, the better off you'll be. Carry on with life as best as you can until labor is undeniable. The earliest you want to go to the hospital is usually when your surges are about 5 minutes apart, lasting 1 minute over the course of at least 1 hour, but more is better. If you're a first-time mama hoping to go unmedicated, you can generally labor at home longer, till your surges are closer to that 3 or 4 minute apart mark. But timing of surges alone isn't the best indication of labor progress, and I teach you all about that in the Built to Birth course. Going to the hospital early in labor will likely increase your chance of interventions. Now, the number one thing not to do when labor begins is to focus on your contractions. That means no timing contractions, no getting in the zone right away, no getting up in the middle of the night to get stuff ready. If you do this from the beginning, labor is going to feel much longer than it needs to. Instead, tell yourself it's probably nothing until you can no longer deny that it's something. And then even at this point, you're still going to have plenty of time to start timing a few surges, getting in the zone with comfort measures, hypnobirthing, breathing, etc. All things I teach you in the Built to Birth course, and prepping things for your birth or having your partner do it for you. So those 2 tips will help you tremendously at the beginning of labor, but is going to transfer over throughout the rest of your labor as well. Mamas are always wondering, is this labor? So even if you have all the signs, you might still be wondering, is this really it? But those are the most surefire ways to know that labor is starting or has already begun. Plus, your intuition is so powerful in knowing whether it's the real deal or not. If you're feeling anxious or scared about anything birth related, you need to get educated with empowering information, and the Built to Birth course is waiting for you. Knowledge is power, and the course is linked down below, waiting for you to step into your birthright of empowered birthing. So thanks for being with me in this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, mamas.